Yeah, welcome to another expert talk, which is not a talk. It's again a sort of fishbowl discussion like we had last month, and it went very well. And we decided, no, let's have another one in that format. And again, not focus so much on technical talks, because last year it was very technically oriented with lots of demos and how-tos and programming and operability and so on. So we decided now to increase or augment our scope a little bit and focus on other areas of our trade or our craft that deserve attention, because we're not just programmers or we're not just engineers.
Yeah.
So,
Can I just ask, out of curiosity, who here is an engineer? Okay, good. Okay, so I'm the minority. Okay. So we're talking about engineers pairing with product managers. Yeah, I'm the token product manager.
So here with us is Neha. She's a product manager with Equal Experts.
Yeah.
And not here with us is Ali, who is head of operability at Equal Experts as well in London, right?
Yes, I am currently in London.
And thank you all for joining. So.
And yourself, Luís.
Oh yeah, well, I'm just an engineer.
Yeah. So we're going to try something different. Like rather than, as Luís mentioned, we're going to try to do this as a guided discussion. So like we've put down what some of our thoughts are, but we really want for you to kind of feed in and share your examples and challenge what our views are as well. Because we're hoping that we can learn from this session as well. So it'd be great to get feedback at the end, especially on the structure and how you found it.
Just remember that we have the microphone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So don't get too cheeky.
Yeah. So this talks about when engineers and product managers pair. And I think this is something that's quite close to our three hearts. Like we've sort of seen and experienced a lot of pain working in teams, experiencing silos and all those sorts of things, which was kind of some of the initiation for this particular talk. Cool. So also I'm playing around with an iPad, which I'm still not entirely used to, so just bear with me. So what does it actually look like to actually pair as engineers and product managers?
This is something we do day to day as engineers, pairing with each other. The idea of pair programming is actually quite old, from the invention of extreme programming. It's usually coupled with TDD, and it's a way of not creating silos in a team, because if you leave developers to work on their own things, one guy will end up specializing in the back end, and another guy will be specializing on the front end, another is database and stuff, but the other is sysadmin stuff or operability stuff. So, and we can't allow these silos to emerge, because if one of them gets sick or goes on vacation, the whole project stalls, because there will be fewer people to focus or to work on that particular part of the project. And so we have this concept of pair programming and pair rotation, so that knowledge flows across the team. But we're going to talk about something a little bit different, because we're not talking about pairing within a discipline. It will be across roles, right?
Yeah, exactly. Out of curiosity, does anybody have any thoughts around what that might mean? So as an engineer, if you were to pair with, like, let's say a UX or a product manager, what do you think that might be? What would that potentially look like?
For what I think, it would be the product manager will have more contact with the PO and organizing the backlog. The developer can help on that, about detailing and giving some insights about the impact of the stories.
So kind of like Three Amigos. Are you familiar with like the Three Amigos practice? Or? Yeah, Tiago knows exactly. Actually, do you want to explain what the Three Amigos are?
No, I just decided
Yeah.
I had my first meeting today with 3 amigos.
Yeah, yeah.
So I have some experience.
Can you explain it?
Yeah, sure. So it's basically, so 3 amigos. I don't know the origins of it, but there's basically 3 people, all from completely different disciplines, who work together to understand the scope for a story, and they define the acceptance criteria. So, like I've had 3 amigos where there's myself as a product manager. I might have someone from customer support, so representing the user, and then maybe an engineer. Or I might have myself, a designer, and an engineer. So you can kind of mix the specialisms, but the idea is that because you have completely different perspectives, you're able to kind of think about the problem from different angles. And you end up with like far more robust acceptance criteria, but then also there's a lot more clarity and less ambiguity as you're actually building the story and you're doing the testing.
It's also quite valuable to use that when you're kicking off work. So if the way you structure your story is a prelude to a conversation, when you pick up a card, we've had situations where we've sort of done the 3 amigos, where you've got a developer and you've got a QA and you've got a BA involved. And so you get these 3 perspectives, and one person says, I'm going to build it, the other person says, I'm going to break it, and the third person says, why are we building it at all? Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be 3 people. In my current project, we kick off story. We kick off a story, and we usually create a call to kick it off, and it's on the Slack channel, so anyone can drop in if they feel like they have something to add. And it's usually 4 or 5 amigos because it's it's a developer there, so that's 2 people right off the bat. And then there's QA joining and UX and the BA, and sometimes it's the architect joins as well. So it's so it's a lot of people, but it's really useful to have this sort of conversation because there's a lot. Sometimes there's some ambiguity in the way the stories are written, even if they're very thoroughly specified. Sometimes there's ambiguity, and it's good to clear this up before you actually dive into the work and ask all of these people, is this the right requirement? Is this what you're expecting to see? And how are you going to test this, etc., etc.?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, my first experience that I had today was not 3 amigos, like it was 7 people in the so from 4 different
like disciplines.
Yeah. And my first thought that it's good that we have like the answer fast. And you don't have all that talk, and then put them on a shelf or something like that, and then you have to try to remember everything that happened. But I might thought that it's easy to raise questions and also have the answer really big.
Yeah, and was that for a story, or was that sort of like for a feature, or?
Was for 2 things,
Okay.
for features.
Okay, nice. Yeah. 7 amigos. I think that's definitely winning.
A lot of amigos.
Yeah, exactly.
Almost soccer team.
There's no prize for having the most friends, by the way. So, I think people can stop showing off now. We have 57 amigos on my team.
Oh.
Everyone loves each other.
So, as you were saying, like when you're doing sort of intra pairing, so like within a discipline.
Yeah. Usually when 2 people are, 2 developers or 2 engineers are pairing on a particular story or bug, obviously they're not going to be typing away on their keyboards at the same time because they're working on the same code base. So it's usually one of them, and the alternate, of course, but one of them is the driver, and they have the keyboard and they write things down, and the other is like a co-pilot, is a navigator, and is basically is guiding, but he's also warning the driver against potential mistakes or pitfalls, and it's a very interesting collaboration. To have. It's not very common, or sometimes in certain companies it happens on a more case-to-case basis, where on special occasions someone has a problem and they tap someone else on the shoulder and can you help me with this, and they both work on something.
Or you're new to the team.
Or
and
you're new to the
onboarding.
team, yeah.
Yeah.
But here at EE, we do this by default, and we only break these pairs when we think it doesn't bring any value.
Mm-hmm.
And this is great to get the knowledge about the code base and even the problem and, the requirements,
Mm-hmm.
and get that flowing across the technical team. It's really good. It's great because you can have a backend or mostly backend developer pairing with someone who's a mostly front-end developer, and they'll be teaching each other, from their disciplines, and so we'll smooth out the skill level across the team.
So I have a question regarding that. So normally on client side, people will clients will categorize people in a particular way. We're a consultancy for people who are working in a product company. And have you ever had people challenge you on saying, well, why is this specialism as a programmer programming this thing that is not a specialism? Have you not had that case switch?
I've never had that situation. Because before joining EE, it was usually the backend stuff went to a backend developer, and after I joined EE, it never came up because we had someone who was a backend developer on the team and someone who was a front end developer on the team. Mostly, it's not a binary thing, and they complemented each other because they worked in pairs. It was never a case of the front-end developer being by themselves working on something with no knowledge of what mistakes.
I actually experienced that a little bit where I was before. We had front-end developers and back-end developers. And one of the things that happened a lot is the back-end guy would finish his API and say, okay, my part is done. Ship it out and then
throw it over
the wall. And then the front end guy would take it and I can consume this like this. I need this data structured in a whole different way because this won't just work out with the tools I have at my disposal. So then it would go back. The backend guy would change it, then it would go in front, and it would create a ping pong.
There's a lot of time wasted and a lot of resentment building between the developers.
And so that's a common theme also when we're pairing across disciplines, as I'm sure you can imagine and you've probably felt, right? So the example we're talking about, the 3 amigos, you might get a story, it's not very clear, then you develop something, you show it to someone and it's not what someone expected. Then you have to go back around, so you've got these constant feedback loops that it feels like they could be faster, it feels like they could be tighter. So I guess pairing across between a product manager and engineer is a little bit different in that way. So we don't really have the same sort of driver versus navigator dynamic necessarily, or it stays the same. So for example, if we were going to pair on a story, then I might be driving the vision, and you would challenge me on some of those things, and that's where we have here not coming from a certain discipline gives you an advantage because you can ask the beginner questions. How people say, oh, there's no such thing as stupid questions. It's those really simple, basic questions that when we're in a specialism, we take for granted. Because you stop asking yourself, right? You start asking yourself more complex questions. So for me, as a product manager, one of the things I love most about being able to pair with an engineer is that sometimes they can make me feel stupid because they'll ask a question and I'm like, oh. How have I not thought about something so fundamental? And vice versa as well. I think there's validity having someone who's non-technical sometimes ask a question. Sometimes it feels a bit frustrating, maybe. Someone should know about the technical aspects, but you can flip it and also see maybe there's an opportunity there where maybe we're making some assumptions that we should actually try to challenge as well.
We've actually had a not exactly pairing, but we had a project where we were stuck in the technical team, discussing some approaches to testing the software, to automated testing. And our BA at the time, and she wasn't technical at all, but she got curious and she started researching some stuff and she came up with a few videos and she sent it to us. And it was she actually contributed to resolve the discussion, and she pointed out to something that was so fundamental that we had forgotten about testing, and it was kind of we should scale it down a little bit here and focus on something else. And it was really, really useful to have this sort of initiative from her, because we hadn't actually invited her. And so now imagine if we had actually brought her into the conversation and allowed her to contribute or ask even the basic question.
Yeah, the value. I hope you don't mind me pointing out, but I could see you sort of nodding there. Does some of it sound familiar?
Yeah, because many times I feel free to make the stupid questions.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the right expression. You are allowed to make the stupid questions, and sometimes it came up some points that anyone thought.
Exactly. And you know, like one of the examples where I think I've seen it work best is when so there's like the senior strategy meeting where we had all these C-suite people, so like CEO, CMO, C whatever, right? And there was a lowly engineer, you know, who was in that strategy meeting, and it was amazing because by the questions that he was asking, it became so clear that the leadership was totally out of touch with their organization. They didn't know who was building their product. They didn't know who their users were. They wanted to do these lofty things, and actually it was so unachievable and so impractical, you know, but sometimes you need someone to ask those beginner questions to actually put you in context. Yeah. And then, like, I think other aspects as well, it's kind of like, we touched on this a little bit earlier, like sort of stress testing our thinking. So with the beginner questions, you know, you really start to get put on the spot and you really stress test your own position on things. And there's like there's an opportunity, although we don't do the driver versus navigator, I guess we can still tag team. Like one person could lead while the other person takes notes, like if you're in a workshop, and then swap around as you dip in and out. So that kind of collaboration is quite nice.
But I guess that as this pairing experience matures, people will be more comfortable in leaping
into that side. Yeah, that is definitely on the more mature kind of established practice in the spectrum. Yeah. So we're kind of thinking, and there's sort of 3 different areas, I guess, that where we can kind of see this working.
Building, spiking, and research. So one of the things that we did on my last project was we tried to get the UX designer more involved in exploration. Because sometimes there were some questions about, is it better this way or that way? And you can sketch it out on Sketch, but it's not a working prototype. And it's sometimes simpler for us to actually do it in code and see something that's living and breathing. And if we can get a quick feedback cycle, so it's not going to be a huge feature, but like changing a few buttons or going between checkboxes and select boxes, stuff like that, minor stuff like that, but it allows the designer to suggest things and the engineer to quickly implement them. And we are able to test these assumptions, with very, very quick feedback loop, rather than say, well, I've done this, now we have to wait for it to go to staging, and then the designer checks it and says, oh no, that's not it, and it's much longer. So if they pair together and they're able to just, even the engineer is able to suggest stuff that the UX designer isn't considering.
Definitely. And then there's stuff like around influencing. So when you pair on things like workshops, like inceptions, strategy workshops, business planning sessions, it's a really good opportunity to be able to influence the direction as well, because oftentimes all these decisions are made and then we have to follow through on those decisions. We don't feel like we had a voice, like we weren't able to ask the beginner questions or make suggestions, as you were saying. And there's an aspect of that where sometimes you don't feel respected as an expert, as someone who has a valuable contribution to make. So,
and even if you do have to implement those things and your suggestions aren't heard, just understanding why a feature is being built or being requested is fair, because understanding why is
Yeah,
It's a great motivator.
A lot of the time I also feel like when engineers are involved into the why of a feature, you come up with suggestions of way simpler ways of building the same thing, achieving the same result without complicating it too much, or like just a different approach to it.
Yeah, agreed. I have one example of that actually. So this is like a different client that I've worked with in the past, and so they had a request come through from one of their stakeholders. So what they did is, and the feedback was, there's a certain type of customer that they have, and in order to make it easier for them to manage their accounts and billing and all these sorts of things, they want to basically have like a more granular level of access control. So they can say some people have access to certain aspects of the product, other people have access to other parts of the product. So there was this very big complex access control model that was designed and then built, and it took like a year or whatever it was. And when we had the actual team, like I think there was a designer, engineer, product, who were in the room with the actual person, the actual user, and we were asking them, so let's just take a step back, like what was your pain point? What was the problem that you were facing? The only problem they were facing was that they were finding it difficult to reconcile invoices. So all they wanted was to be able to link invoices together, and that's it. So we spent this whole year building this thing, which didn't need to happen, right? So like there's constant examples of that, like where actually when you get closer to where the problem is and you pair on that,
I've had a similar experience building access control lists, but also workflows. So that stuff for CMS, that stuff wouldn't get published without being approved first by someone. And well, in theory, they claim to need that, but in practice, what happened is, I want to publish this now, and I can't wait for someone to review this. So people ended up being given full access to the platform, so they could publish straight away without being checked or affected.
So I think I had an interesting experience on Discovery actually, where a bunch of people had we'd gone down, we'd actually spent 2 days trying to figure out how to convince this one team at a $6 billion organization, basically would go off and do all sorts of crazy things with infrastructure, how to get them sorted out. And then actually one of our developers asked a question saying, what's the impact of this overall in your organization? And they said, well, out of about $6 billion, it's about 100 million. Okay. And so then they said, okay, so what about, if we just sort out this other thing that seems to sort of be really simple, it's like 5 billion. And so the point was, okay, so which problem are we solving? We spent 2 days trying to explore, and it seemed really complex. Or can we just solve this really simple problem? Yeah. We would have built something really different.
And it ties in like with the third point here, which is around like working as one team. Like, there's like a great opportunity there where like you get to share like the highs, the lows, like share the love, the pain points, have a common vision and mission, as Ali highlighted. And there was a point that Ali mentioned around like generating capital. Did you want to raise anything around that?
Yeah, so the point is that effectively the way human beings work is that if you ideally, if you together, you establish a common goal, you just spontaneously develop respect for people, right? For each other. And so the idea is that occasionally when you actually need to borrow against that, right? You just say, just trust me on it. Like, I don't have figures, or I don't have this. I just have a gut feeling, and we don't have time to validate it. That you generate, you bank this, right? And occasionally you can draw upon it, and that just comes from working together. Because people, much as you want to explicitly say, I trust somebody, you trust somebody. When you sort of go through shared experiences.
So, what do we currently struggle with? Do you want to talk through this or?
So what we struggle with, well, as engineers, mostly is understanding what the business wants or really needs, and why.
Yeah. So like if we imagine we've got our customer here and they've got some needs and problems, and then there's all these opportunities, but we don't really get visibility of those opportunities. And like that problem or the need from the customer, it goes to maybe customer support, which then goes to some analytics person, which then maybe goes to marketing, which then maybe goes to, I don't know, somebody else, which then goes to someone else, to an internal user, and then it comes to me. So I've already had like 4 people with their hands all over this thing, and as you can see, that problem, it changes the shape as it comes to me. So I don't even know what the original story was anymore. And then I now have to speak to Luís and explain it to him. And that changes again because we're communicating in language, and obviously, you know, people misinterpret, we communicate in different ways. And then we have to go back all the way through that cycle again to deploy to the users and see whether it met their needs. And then get the feedback again to see whether it met their
When
needs.
it happens.
When
Sometimes the chain is broken somewhere.
Yeah,
Someone doesn't have time to speak with someone else and just
yeah.
give some random answer or something they feel is the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not properly validated, and then
Yeah.
engineers end up spending months building something that business doesn't actually need.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then I feel like sometimes there's this, we were talking about this client-supplier relationship between like the PM and the engineer sometimes. It feels like, I want you to do this,
Right.
and it's like, I have to do this.
Not necessarily an engineer, so you can swap the engineer role with anything really. It could be a designer, it could be anything.
Yeah. And then every now and again, like you've got someone, like to your point, like you've got the business, right? And then there's someone senior in the business who kind of swoops in and they say, actually, this is what I want you to do. And it has nothing to do with the user and what their problem was. So again, like we've got that as a conflicting message as well.
Because the business needs are not necessarily aligned with the business client's needs,
No.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even within a client, you know, it doesn't have to even to do with building something, sometimes even acquiring a product for the company to use. It's like it's decided by some manager somewhere,
Oh
and
my
they
God, yes.
and they buy something that's really, really expensive, and they pay like thousands of euros in licensing fees, and you know, they toss it down to some poor soul who has to work with a terrible interface and a terrible application that doesn't solve their needs at all.
I also love when the choice of what product to buy is made because the manager that has the power of decision knows someone.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I know that guy, and he told me it's good. So he's a sales on the product side, and so I'm going for that.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, has anyone here ever paired with procurement?
The legal stuff?
Yeah.
I didn't pair with them, but I have several meetings
Right.
with them. With this GDPR stuff, it's like nowadays it's a buzzword.
Yeah.
In our products, we need to be compliant with them, especially if we ship them to the United States.
Okay.
And we get a lot of meetings with them. So basically, in Berlin, the office in Berlin, they got like a lawyer there.
Okay.
So he is not pairing with anyone, but he is there like an ambassador or like a coach that will work that will give support for several teams that will need them.
Okay. I think like there's an opportunity there.
Yeah.
Sure. Because also, like, you know, even like the procurement processes, they're not really designed around the people who need to get the tools in, right?
That used to be my job, actually, at a company where I used to work with our general counsel, with the general counsel of a very large university, and I also worked at a startup when somebody was doing due diligence with us to audit all the licenses with our lawyer. So, you know, I had done work on open licenses. So it was actually really fun because I got to see a lawyer's perspective on how they interpret language. And then, you know, they got to see what, you know, how people use and adopt software licenses when they're not lawyers. So that's really fun.
Yeah. That'll be super interesting. Cool. So when could pairing actually really help?
Ramping up new people,
Yeah.
switching technologies. It can happen that for example, in the front-end side, you have a guy that is really good in Angular, and we are switching to React.
Do you want to sit at the front?
If you don't mind being filmed.
Yeah. And then Ali will be able to hear you. What about product managers and engineers? When do you think that product managers and engineers could pair?
Product managers?
Yeah, and engineers.
As you said before, when they are talking about what is the acceptance criteria, sometimes what I saw was the PMs are really focused on delivering value to the user, and the engineers are thinking on the scenarios that thing can blow up.
Yeah.
So basically, I think that's a good point. Other one is also helping the product managers to schedule meetings with the PO about things and details that are needed to be clarified so we can unblock future stories. That's something that I saw and I experienced.
Yep.
One thing, I have an example that's pretty fresh in my memory because we still battled with it today in the afternoon. We have like this feature in our application where we have a table and a bunch of data in it, and we have to define which is the first row, which is the last row, and we have to order this. The problem is the relation between the data is not transitive. So for any sorting algorithm, the data has to be transitive. So if you have three data points and you say two of them are equal, and the first one is equal to one of them, it has to be equal to all of them. But our data doesn't have this property, so we can't actually use a sorting algorithm. And I think like for something like this, it would be really helpful if we just paired like when this feature was defined at the start to like understand this at that point and just change the requirements to make this way easier to implement or something. Because the way it is now, the funny thing is the requirements are actually changing to make that would actually make this easy to implement without any problem. But because now the users have a pain point there. But
sometimes engineers assume that requirements are immutable,
and
they don't. They're like block themselves from even bringing it up because they assume they're going to be told by business or their PM or whatever. No, you can't do that. We have to implement what we're telling you to. But
I would say that comes from the older methodologies. You are working now with Exim programming. I worked with Waterfall, then I worked with Scrum. And now I'm working with Exim programming, and I see the things are becoming even more flexible and adapting. And when we have some stories about legal stuff, it happened in one scenario that we had some issues with the legal regarding some libraries of we were using Golang and that kind of things. We got some issues, so we really need to adapt faster with that. So.
So understanding the problem and being able to sort of pair on some of that stuff definitely helps, like much earlier on in the process. I mean, even earlier on in that process, I think like a good opportunity to be able to sort of pair is when you're forming the team.
You mentioned ramping up teams.
Yes, so basically when you have a org that is really senior, he can be the driver, the other one is just the navigator, and even if he's just looking to the screen, he is learning, he's getting knowledge, and he's also giving some advices, because even a senior guy do some kind of mistakes, so that thing is always valid value for the team.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think as you're building a team out, I think it's quite useful to get different perspectives, because you can optimize for culture fit and you can optimize for that. So organizations like Google or Facebook, think of them as you will. I think they have their challenges, but it's hard to debate that they're good at shipping products. And the interesting thing there is that they get people from different specialisms to interview together as a group, and varying perspectives matter. They don't necessarily go through a panel of just developers or a panel of, just user experience researchers or things like that. You have to sort of make sure that it fits for everyone in order to get hired.
Yeah. And there's something quite nice about that, because then, so I remember one of the interviews that we had like a couple of years ago with one of the clients that I was working with. So we were hiring for a designer, and we had myself, an engineer, and I can't remember, maybe it was a QA. And it was fascinating because we all know that we would interact with the designer in different ways. So actually having everybody there meant that we were all asking questions, thinking about how's that going to impact me in the work that I do. So it's really good because it also then puts the designer on the spot, and they're kind of thinking, well, actually, how do I make sure that this all kind of works for everybody as a team as well? Not just thinking about working with the product manager and then no one else, because everybody has to use the designs, right? Not just the product manager. That was definitely quite powerful.
Also, in my work, our team contains a product manager. We're actually engineers and a product manager, and that's it.
Yeah.
And now this started like 2 weeks ago. And having the product manager with us, it's actually very good because it's much easier to onboard them with the specific domain knowledge.
Yes.
And they can understand things much easier because just at the end, just ask questions.
Yes.
So much easier.
Definitely. So actually, for me, this is a bit of an anti-pattern in Scrum, where there's like the team and then the product owners kind of outside, and it feels like a very combative relationship. Yeah, but that's aside. Again, for another expert talk.
And even in more dysfunctional organizations, you have the same Scrum Master, the same product manager shared across teams. It's really hard for that person to immerse themselves in the culture and in the problems and the concerns and. It's easier to join into the celebrations, but but to understand the pain points of the team, sometimes it's very hard because their attention is split across multiple teams.
Definitely.
Other scenario is not just building the team, but I think wrapping up the project really on the early stages. After the scoping, when we are really doing design and framing, it's really helpful to have designers, have the developers, have the PM. And I was also, in my experience, able to get the PO there. So we were just doing some sketches on paper to see, okay, all these products will impact or bring value to the user. So it's just not delivering a product, but making it attractive for the users. So we really get a lot of ideas. So everyone has like a kind of UI that prefers type, and we got a lot of inputs, and maybe the designer is the most skilled on that, but it can also give some points to the designer to use their job.
Yeah, definitely. So we do like inceptions and discoveries for that reason, right?
It's pretty much a close collaboration across roles. And we have BA and a product owner and someone who's technical, an engineer or an architect, and a UX designer working together and sketching out the requirements and some initial mock-ups and initial prototypes and do these rapid iterations. But what's really important or a priority to the business or a priority to the users, to the end user. And it's really useful to have a lot of the major questions being cleared up from the start and making sure that when we start building, we're actually building the right stuff, not a laundry list of requirements that.
So one example, less than like a discovery, I guess, but it was more like a rapid prototyping. So we had a product and it was a learning product, and for some reason we found that people weren't getting past a certain point in the registration process, and they had to register in order to access some of the content. So some of the content could be accessed for free, but then you needed to log in so we could also track your behavior, make recommendations, and save where you were in your learning journey. So we found that people weren't necessarily going all the way through the registration process. So what we did is we created and this was built on like a really horrible stack. So to make any changes on this platform would take weeks, even if it's like to move a button from here to here. So we were like, we cannot rapidly test this product. So what we did instead is we actually prototyped it. We prototyped it into like a clickable prototype, and we did some usability tests. So what we did is we had some users in a room. We were sitting in the other room with the engineers and the designers, and the researcher in there was kind of guiding the user through and asking them to do certain things, and it was fascinating. So we could actually see the screen that the users were seeing, and like, you know how you've got eyeball tracking, so you can see the heat map of where people are looking and where they're not looking. So all of a sudden it became really clear that the information architecture of the page, for example, wasn't clear, because when we asked them to do something, they were scanning in all these different places and not seeing where it actually was. So our developer quickly made some changes, and then the next hour, when the next user came in, we were able to test that and see, did that solve that problem? Yes. Now there's a different problem. So through that process, I think over this span of like a week, so we had like, as an example, I can't remember the specific day, but Monday might have been planning, Tuesday was rapid prototyping and testing, Wednesday was planning and debrief, and then Thursday was prototyping again. So we had like a number of iterations on the prototype. So by the end of just 1 week, we were able to figure out what the root causes were for the registration problem and find other opportunities as well. And that's amazing. Like, you didn't have to do a single deployment to production, and you were able to actually understand what the root cause of the problem was. It's fascinating.
There are actually really cool tools for that. A front-end guy I worked with, he studied design, but he was doing front-end for us, and he had a tool where he would just draw on a piece of paper, then take a photo of it, upload that photo to a tool, and then he could make clickable areas that would go to other pictures. So it would just be a workflow of pictures where you could actually even use it on a cell phone and click on it, and it would have that interaction. Just like
a question. So as a product manager, I would totally use that because I can't code to save my life. As an engineer, would you think of yourself as a self-respecting engineer if you would use a tool like that? Could you bring yourself to use a tool like that?
I think in the early stage of a project, it's awesome because you scrap something on paper, take a picture, and in 10 minutes afterwards you have a prototype.
Totally. It's just that, like, I don't know, right? Because I know how much engineers like to code, do serious coding.
I think it will help a lot because I think when we start working, we start to think how to make this better and better, and I think we lose a lot of time on something that would be to throw away. So I think
that's actually my biggest point on this. I think is. We like to code. I personally love to code, but I hate to throw away code. So to code something, to throw it away afterwards for a prototype,
it's not a museum. You're not building a museum.
Yeah, of course.
it's a work of art.
That's the other perspective.
I'm very, I've learned to actually be that extreme. I love to delete code. It's like it's the best feeling. It's like when you look at you do git diff or whatever to check how many lines of code changed, and you see that you've deleted more lines than you've added. Oh, it feels so good.
Do you know
fewer lines, fewer bugs, and fewer things to worry
This
about.
is another thing that engineers and PMs can pair on though, because PMs, I think that similar to like engineers not liking to maybe throw away code, PMs hate to clear their backlog. Like get a product owner or a product manager to like blitz everything in the backlog, and you've got like anxiety attacks. So actually, it's a really good practice, and I try to do this like every 3 to 6 months. Blitz it all. If you haven't looked at it already, you don't need to. The most important things will come back. So actually, this would be a really good way for like engineers and product managers to make sure that they've kept both of their houses in order. Like pair on it and like get the engineer. Like the engineer would be like, do you really need to keep that? Make sure you blitz it.
Oh yeah, I love doing that.
Yeah.
Like, let's remove a feature. Yes.
But you still want to have a job, right? Like.
Of course.
Yeah.
But I understand that, and I feel the same way about like when you're refactoring code and you can just delete like half of it because like there are features you implemented that never got shipped, and the code stays in the code base. Just remove it. It's not doing anything there. If you need it, go into Git and get it out of there. But like on the other hand, just investing like hours into building a prototype that then you just bin it in the end if you have a better alternative.
Yep, and then cheaply. So, Ellie, you came up with this, which I think was quite apt. Sometimes you kind of hear that, product or product managers, they want to do X, but Y is what is actually needed. I guess we'll just have to do X. So this sense of resignation that, we kind of have to do this thing. And we were kind of talking about the whole concept of team sport and working as a team.
Yeah, we were. I mean, I think Luís had a point about sort of the engineer-user interaction. I think you could sort of speak to that before I get into the whole team sport bit, Luís.
It's sometimes the engineers feel disconnected from, they are disconnected from the end user because not only do they have, I don't take this the wrong way, ATM in the way, but there's also business in the way and any number of players in the way. And you don't get, sometimes even designers, and it's extremely frustrating for designers who are interested in doing actual user research. And they can get to an actual end user to test their prototypes or their ideas on.
Yep.
And it's frustrating also for engineers because we should be optimizing for user impact rather than do some performance optimization that ends up being completely pointless. Like I can make this list render like when it's got 10 million records, but no user is going to be seeing 10 million records at the same time, so why? Right? Yeah. So why don't we do something that actually helps the user, but not having this channel to get feedback from a user, it's really frustrating.
And I feel sometimes it's really like bizarre, because there are situations where like the user is sitting like 2 rooms over or in the floor below, and you could just take an hour of your day and shadow him and look at what his pain points are.
So what stops us from doing that?
Convention?
Sometimes I think it's in some scenarios maybe there is a manager layer, and maybe the product will be used regardless if the actual users want it or not. Maybe it's like an internal product, maybe it's a back office product, and the opinions of the users are not so important, and then you have a manager that hides the requirements. Other example that I had was when we are not able to reach the end users for some products. Since it was for some apps, we help the design, us as developers help the designers, like they were doing interviewing us or to use that prototype. So it's like doing some tests, not really for the end user, but for someone that doesn't have like a fashion design.
I think the point that I think to speak specifically to that point, I think it's the sort of skeleton was the product team want to do X, but a whole bunch of people say, but Y is needed, and then you say, well, but product said that we need to do X, and sort of this divide that you have, right? And so people just resign themselves to saying, oh well, we know that Y is really needed, and that could be which feature prioritized, that could be a refactor to clean things up, or any of those things, and because you're removed, because you're not collaborating, you just say, well, product says we have to do X, and you're like, okay, so there's almost disinvestment, right? So you sort of do it because you've been ordered, not do it because you believe it, and then that's a challenge a lot of times.
You feel alienated, from the project, because it's really demoralizing or demotivating to be receiving orders for stuff that you could do differently. If you had a way to communicate your concerns, the other way, and it's. I'm reminded of we were chatting about this a while back. I'm reminded of the division of labor, very Victorian thing, that you have like a designer or a thinker or an inventor or a manager in the upper floors, and then on the factory floor there's the workers, and they don't get to question anything. Yeah. And they get their intellectual feedback is devalued over time, and that there's no investment in them, and they don't invest themselves, or that there's no emotional or investment in the product that you're building. So things deteriorate quite rapidly in this sort of environment, because then one starts to resent the other. Because one is lazy and the other is like doesn't understand. Just one second.
No worries. And then does this feed into the point about sort of development and building as a team sport, Ali?
I think there's an idea, there's a distinction, right? So development building is a team sport, but I think there's a balance to be struck, because we have specialisms for a reason. I think those people can sort of can contribute. So I mean, I think that Neha has very kindly set me up for a joke that I made when we were planning this, right? And so this was I don't know if anyone has heard this, and please shout out if you have. So it's, what is a camel?
Does anyone know what a camel is?
No.
An animal?
So the standard joke is, it's a horse designed by committee. Right? So you get this situation where, everyone is sort of, everyone's trying to build consensus and this and that. Normally, we have experts and we recognize expertise for a reason. That doesn't mean that they work in an ivory tower, right? That means that there is this, as Neha has depicted. There's do you want to speak more to that, Neha?
Yeah, sure. Because we sometimes get these ivory towers, like you've got the product manager who goes out, to bring back the problem, and then you've got the team who comes up, or the team or the engineers who come up with a solution. Like, we think that's an ideal situation, but even that isn't ideal, because it's like the product manager is spending all this time getting all this context that the engineers don't have, and the product manager can have some ideas to contribute to the solution design as well. So there's something about when we collaborate on defining the problem and setting priorities, and even looking at the processes that we follow, we can sometimes push ourselves out of our comfort zone, and that's okay. So one thing that obviously everybody is very uncomfortable about, including product managers, is going to meetings. No one likes going to meetings, right? We all hate it. But the reality is that we need to spend some time with other human beings in order to understand the problem, right? To get context. And yes, there's more efficient ways that we could do that, through discoveries and through workshops, but we don't always have the luxury of that, so we do still need to spend some time in meetings. And sometimes as a product manager, I can sometimes feel like I have to go out there and put myself up for sacrifice, I end up having 90% of my time taken up by meetings, so that my team gets shielded from that. But in shielding them, there's the flip side, which is that they also lose the context. So actually, if we could pair on that and share the pain a little bit of maybe going to some of those meetings or those workshops, the team would have a better context. I would maybe not feel as pained either about always going to those meetings. And so there's potentially an opportunity there to actually, for both sides, to actually get something of value from that. And there's one team where I had a very strong tech lead, and he and I would literally pair on this stuff. So sometimes he'd go to a business prioritization meeting and I wouldn't even be there. And it wouldn't even matter, because the business trusted, or the rest of the organization trusted, that as long as one of us was there, we had the same understanding and the same view on things.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So for what I saw is, in my team nowadays, every time that there is a meeting with the PO, the PM is never alone. There is always maybe the anchor or maybe another developer. So to avoid the knowledge silos that we talked about in the beginning, and also and we would also rotate on that. So everyone is, the PM sacrifices itself, but at least the developers, they will rotate and share the knowledge with the team. So it would be easier. Basically, it is two people that has different contexts, and they understand, and they can have different judgment, and they can share the knowledge. And also for the user interviews, one thing that it's nice is normally the designer or the PM are driving the user interview, and me as a developer, I'm just taking some notes because we will need to look at them for future improvements.
Well, we did something similar in this last project of mine, where we had these kind of pre-planning roadmap meetings where, BO, UX, BA, the tester was involved, the architect as well, and always a developer. I think the main challenge here would be with our by rotating engineers, there's some burden on keeping these engineers within the proper context, because since they're paired, they're not necessarily transferring this context, across sessions. So there's burden. I would guess falls on the business side or on the PM side, but it's certainly doable, and it's very, very useful to, on one hand, understand why things are being prioritized the way they are, and also raise as quickly as possible, raise technical questions that might affect that prioritization. Like, you need to build X before you can build Y, because there is a technical reason for doing it.
I think one of the things that people forget, though, is also that different focuses or foci, if I'm looking pedantic, bring interesting. A lot of times, bring useful stuff to the table, not necessarily stuff that people love to hear, but you can always, if you're there, you can make the case for paying back debt. How many times have you had a planning and discovered, oh, nobody's left any space for that payback, right? If you're in the painful meetings where the senior stakeholders are present, you can be like, you know what? So you talk about why it takes us this long to ship a feature. We're building on really shaky foundations. We're borrowing heavily, right? How about we spend some time actually paying back what we've borrowed? If you're there and people hear it often enough, they'll start to realize that it matters, and then it actually improves overall quality and lowers time to ship.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Ali, you were mentioning a point, right, that all technical debt, you could argue, is kind of business debt in sort of tech-driven companies.
Yeah, if you're a tech-focused company, what are you borrowing, right? How are you borrowing? To basically just restrict it to as tech debt is almost you're eventually going to, if you can't move, if you're a tech-focused company, you're going to die, right? So whether you're borrowing from the bank or you're borrowing from your technology, you're taking on debt.
Yeah. And as a product manager, if I get involved more in the team and in what the team is doing, especially when they're making design decisions or they're deciding to actually take some debt right now, planning to pay it off later, if they make me aware of that, if I'm part of the doing, not just the meetings but the actual doing, then also I understand the cost that we're incurring, because it's a joint cost. We're all taking on that cost. So I know that, okay, it's going to make me slower, it's going to make all of us slower, it's going to increase the risk or whatever it is. And it empowers me also to make better decisions. So even pairing on the doing side and making product managers aware of some of this stuff is incredibly powerful. Because also, even if, let's say, you don't have an engineer, if you're not going to that business meeting, if the product manager has paired with you, they can be your advocate and they can actually take that message through, which is really powerful. So I think we've spoken a lot about the benefits. Should we, is there anything in particular, any particular benefits we want to call out? Or maybe we can ask the rest of you, are there any particular questions, any particular areas that you're interested in either talking about or asking questions around? Because we've just been telling you about all the good stuff. It's also very challenging, don't get us wrong. The burden of knowledge sharing, being pushed out of your comfort zone. And, sometimes it can be quite, it's quite confronting. If you're good, most of us are probably very good at what we do. And if you're used to being good at what you do and you have someone who isn't an expert in your field who starts asking you questions, it can feel quite confronting sometimes, right?
Yeah. One thing is, touching a little bit on that point, is I feel this can work really well and give you a lot of benefits, but with the right people. And you have to have the right mindset. When I say people, I mean you have to have people that have the right mindset and be open to these challenges. Because I feel in a lot of traditional companies you have, mainly here in Portugal, from my experience, you have a lot of people that are no, I'm the product guy, you're the developer, we don't mix, this is my domain, that's your domain.
Any intrusion and any questioning of their decisions is a threat to that.
Yeah, so it's like you're possessive with your kind of area.
Because there's a lot of the mentality, like from the old days, the mentality was I have to become indispensable. So I have to have knowledge and power on my side, so I can't be fired. So I have my job security.
And so as you, sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so as in that's still a lot part of the mindset. Yeah.
I think this speaks specifically to Neha's point about the fact that actually trying to challenge that mindset makes a team more autonomous, right? And so she's mentioned the fact that there's a hit by bus on the previous page. It says, if your product owner gets hit by a bus, can the team continue? And I think that should actually be a goal for any functional, conscientious team, right? If you're very, very good at your job, there is no fear here, right? The idea is that you say, well, what if I went on holiday, and would I need to worry? Would I, ideally, hopefully, people are not hoping to get hit by buses.
Yeah. And sometimes you're there, but you're so busy you can take care of everything. Right? It's not even a matter of complete unavailability. It's just being busy, and you're not able to. You won't delegate because you're essential and you're the expert.
So everything stops.
Everything stops.
So I think that's the real benefit is we doing this several times. All the people start to have different kind of skills, and they are able to replace each other. As Neha said, your colleague could replace you on a meeting. So I think that's the one of the benefits, and one of the hard parts is to hire people that are willing to share and are kind of social, and it's even harder. I think it's the most difficult is when you have a company and you already have your team and you always have been working on old-fashioned ways. It's not bad ways. I just say old ways, not bad. And you try to change that the way to work. People are used to that. They are comfortable on that. It's like their cheese. Their safe zone. They do not want to share or explain to others what they do. So it's really difficult in terms of the social part.
Yeah, great. And like tying in with that, like there's certain archetypes. Like there's this thing where we've got kind of there's like my time and then there's like team time, right? So like my time is when I focus, I do deep thinking work. I don't want to be disturbed. And maybe it's probably better for you to talk about this one, Ali, as an engineer. I never get my time.
I guess the idea is that we have this, we have previously had this reference to the ivory tower. I think there's also sort of a development ivory tower saying, this is my time to make this immaculate, beautiful thing. And it's like, oh, don't disturb me. But in the grand scheme of things, most of us are writing CRUD apps, right? We're not really trying to change the world here, right? So let's sort of get a bit less self-important. Let's actually sort of drop this fear that and that, yes, it's very nice to be sort of working in this idea of working in flow, but I think that we need to strike a good balance. I think again, as we were setting up for this conversation, we said I think sometimes people should ask if they're not interrupted for too long. Are you actually being ignored? Is your input not being sought often enough?
Yeah.
I would just to add. Sometimes I think that can be the fear to fail. If people are not talking, maybe they feel fear that he's doing something stupid, or they are trying to do like the ivory tower, and they do not want anyone nearby because he's gonna fail for sure in the beginning. And if he tries to do a masterpiece, for sure there will be several tries. So I think the strategy here, it's also to allow him to think, but he needs to think loud. He needs to speak what he's thinking, what he wants, or what he's trying to achieve, and maybe the other guy will help him with the other inputs. Maybe if it is a guy that does nothing about that tech, he can still gives you another knowledge, another thinking that can push you to the right direction.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of see that when you've got like a product manager and an engineer pairing, and when they actually have that voice in their head, but like it's coming out, and like all the little things that they're thinking of, because we're not used to doing that. Like as product managers, we're not used to pairing, and we're certainly not used to pairing with other product managers. So sometimes it's actually a really hard skill to train yourself into. Whereas as engineers, especially if you're pairing a lot.
Engineers pair among themselves, but pairing with someone who's not technical forces us to translate our knowledge into something that's understandable by a human being.
Yeah.
And it's
not that simple.
It's not simple, but it's really rewarding because sometimes by stating things differently, you realize things that you hadn't realized before. And also you gain some empathy with people you're dealing with, because you're not describing just bits or squares on the screen. You're actually translating it into someone's assumed needs or requirements.
Yeah.
I think even through on engineers are hard to I think the basic here is the communication. You lose context. There are a lot of context added to the main context, so you got to lose all this.
And in fact, you're fairly well. You started pairing like last year, end of last year.
Yeah. Start pairing.
Yep.
Nice. And I was before. Well, actually, I was working almost 3 years from home. So I was that guy just talking to the walls and like a monkey code.
And was it hard, like, to get into that practice then of kind of talking out?
In the beginning, yes, it was hard.
Yeah.
But right now it's very comfortable to talk and have some feedbacks. It's pretty cool.
One thing I also noticed in a couple of past experiences, developers tend to try to build up walls around them because people don't respect the middle term. So once you're available to be interrupted, people will be constantly bugging you about something, and you won't get any work done. So because like there's the myth that if you interrupt a developer, he loses like 15 minutes just to get back into the problem he was working on. I don't believe in that like that, but sometimes it actually happens if you're doing something complex and you're interrupted. It can be hard. So I think because of this, developers started to build up walls around them, so just don't bug me, because I have to be focused. Because if they don't do that, they will be interrupted too much.
Too much, yes.
I feel that is sorry. It's less painful when you have all the team knowing what the other is doing, because most of the time you got interrupted because someone don't know anything about what he needs to do. So when you start sharing your knowledge and rotation, this pairing, it starts getting less painful, because most of the time the person that's going to ask may know what's the context, so you're not going to ask anymore, or he may know that you are working on something that's important, and you try to control himself to ask. So
there's more empathy within the team, like amongst each other as well.
About flow, kind of depends on the person, because some people have a harder time getting back on track, but it also depends on the way these people work. And, for example, personally, it's become much easier since I started doing TDD, for example, because I've learned how to break down my work into these bite-sized chunks where I write a test, small test, I make it pass, and so on. So it's like each test that passes is a checkpoint for me. I don't have to worry about that. So that's maybe the point where I can be interrupted without losing context because they have this automated process going on that makes sure that I'm not making a mistake.
And as you were saying, it's really small parts. So if you are really you are doing support, you are investigating a defect that can be an issue. But really, if you work at that way with TDD, you really work in small chunks. So if you are interrupted, there is no issue, and you really can also make your colleague that maybe is as difficult to pay attention. Different people have different levels of concentration, so you really can help him just doing like a game. So it's not just breaking the flow, but maybe you can also make your colleague getting into the flow.
It is an issue. I mean, even so, like in TDD, so any test or any very small interaction, it happens like within 5-10 minutes maximum. I mean, it's if you really do TDD, right? So it's really small. And if after for example, the first iteration, so someone interrupts you. I mean, because as a developer, you don't think about like only just one test. I mean, there is a whole infrastructure that you keep in mind right now. You just like basically upload it to your instant memory, right? If someone interrupts you and you just flip at it like 15 minutes later or something, when you get back, you need to upload it again. So, and it means like 15 minutes interruption brings you like 40 minutes chunk of time that you do not work at all, so you forget about it. This is why, I mean, talking about the flow, it's important to have one. I mean, we are not talking about like either a towel, but there still be some kind of, for developers, I don't know, sometimes like in interrupted time when they can work. Or it should be more programming or pair programming completely. So.
Well, definitely, that's a very good point. But I think it's the balance to be struck. I think that's why we sort of made it up. Like, are you being interrupted enough, right? So the point is, and enough is a very loaded term here, right? So as we've said, a lot of these practices you're sort of surfing this edge of comfort, right? So the point is, some people like being, sort of at their sort of being challenged, and I think others don't. And maybe this is something that is not coercive. It's not necessarily something that everyone has to be forced to do. But there are, there's a price to be paid for a process, right? I mean, you don't necessarily get it for free. And so maybe I think teams have to establish what is a fair price to pay.
Yeah, and I guess that goes up to maximizing the work throughput of the team and not of a single developer. So if you imagine that for a 15-minute break you lose half an hour, without that 15-minute break the team would be losing half an hour of the other developer as well. So yes, one cannot be constantly switching contexts, that's true. But that goes to maximizing the work that's done by the whole team and not being anyone blocked because of lack of knowledge or these kind of synchronizations.
But I do believe that these kind of synchronizations shouldn't be on hoc. So I mean, there should be either like pair programming, then people just work together in pairs, or it should be some kind of limited amount of periods. Then people can concentrate and work on particular things. Because if you say, okay, so let's put 15 people together in one room, and everyone stop interrupting each other whenever they want. And believe me, if there's like people's team, they still work in one room. And most people do not work with their headphone on. Some they work, some not. So if I get up and go to say, hey Jamie, everyone not everyone, but half of them raise their hand, and they got out of the flow. And I work with several teams, and it works like this, because if someone doesn't know, another one wants to help. So it becomes an issue if you do not create a process which helps to behave in a particular way. So I mean, I do understand the maximum output of a team, but we should also remember that for the developers and all people need to care about them too.
And I think it ties in with what you were saying, where it's like, as a team, we need to figure out what's the best way that we want to work. Like, do we have certain windows where we're accessible, or do we want to say that actually we're happy to be interrupted, right? And it can also change depending on the kind of work we're doing. Like, you might have like a week where it's full of spikes, in which case you're like, you know what, you can interrupt me. But there are times when actually it's like really deep, focused work and you don't want to be interrupted. So I think it's a valid point that as a team we need to figure out what's the best way so that it feels less like an interruption as well, and it's more like a collaboration. Because I think like there's also something about interruption, right? Like interruption feels like it's a bad thing, whereas if we phrase it as maybe collaboration, like it's an opportunity for you to collaborate together to understand the problem or to get involved in another conversation.
One thing we did at my old team to tackle this a little bit, because we were like 2 senior guys with 5 or 6 junior guys around that would constantly be interrupting us, asking questions because they couldn't move on. We would set Slack status to like, don't interrupt me at all, or okay, you can interrupt me whenever you want, depending on what we're doing. And also, instead of getting up and walking to someone and like tapping them on the shoulder, just send them a Slack message before, ask, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Because people will then be able to like see the pop-up in the corner and just finish up what they're doing, writing maybe a comment, okay, I have to do this, I have to do that, and then focus their attention on something else. So like there are little things,
hacks.
Little hacks you can implement as a team, as rules that will help you with this.
And some take time to make it a habit.
Definitely. So just conscious of time, because I know that you all want to eat as well, right? So, Ali, because I know that this is one that you were quite passionate about. Do you want to say anything about the we versus I? When we're thinking about what actually stops us from being able to sort of pair as
so I think this is one of the things that I was wondering about. I don't know how anyone else feels, and this might just be a personal realization. There's a bit of tension between like getting glory for yourself and getting glory for your team, right? And the point is, everyone sort of shares these platitudes, which is, there's no I in team and all of that. Just depends on if you're a bad speller, actually. But the other point is that you have this idea that I didn't get recognized for this work that I did. It's like, no, but our team succeeded, right? We have an awesome product. We have users, they're happy. And that's a pretty big achievement. There's a lot of software that people spend a lot of time writing that is actually pretty bad. There's this idea of, sort of realization that actually, there's frequently no such thing as individual achievement, right? Again, this is really an opportunity for me to share a quote, right? So Newton actually said, if I've seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants, right? And this man actually invented calculus, right? If he can acknowledge the fact that he basically built on the work of others and worked alongside others, then I think that for us, it shouldn't be that hard to do.
And I think like sometimes there's challenges, right? Like in our organization, sometimes like the performance management process, that doesn't really encourage us to be focused on the team. It optimizes for us being focused on our personal achievement sometimes, and sometimes to compete with our colleagues rather than actually help our colleagues. So we have to recognize that sometimes these incentives actually make us behave in ways that we don't think are ideal. But then also, like, maybe there's an opportunity for us to try to influence some of these things once we become aware of these incentives. And I think, like, certainly, I know there's a big point about self-worth. I know a lot of us tie our sense of who we are as people based on like what we achieve. And not just achieve, but even like our contribution. We want to feel useful. And if we don't feel like we're useful, we're like, well, why do I even exist? It's like not enough just to be as a person, We have to always tie ourselves to like some sort of contribution. And I mean, that's not a great way of thinking about things, but it's a reality, So I think that also tends to stop us. Cool. So in summary, when it comes to like pairing product managers and engineers, do it! Just do it! If I could embed like Shia's video in this, I would totally do that. But yeah, I think like, basically start small, start now, just pick like one thing, right? Doesn't
experiment with it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, go back to what you were doing and try something slightly different.
Yeah.
But it's important to start small because it's very tempting to just adopt all the
buzzwords,
professional practices and buzzwords in the market, and then all of them fail, and it's a huge change, and you upset a lot of people, and then it doesn't work, and you blame the tools for it.
Any closing thoughts from anyone? Or any questions?
Yeah, can people give Neha a hand for hand drawing this whole thing?
No, it's all right. I'm trying to force myself to do things I'm uncomfortable with, and drawing is one of them. So yeah, so this is the second time I've done a talk where I've drawn it in advance, because I'm trying to, because we communicate through speech, right? But actually pictures obviously convey a lot more sometimes. So yeah, so any feedback you can give on this would be amazing. But, only good feedback. Cool. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you all.
I really appreciate it.
And thanks Ali for taking time
thanks, Ali.
to join us.
Sure.
It's really great.
Hang out with you guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
What software?
Have a good night.
What software do you use to make the design and the show?
Do you know what? It's actually the free notes app in the iPad. So it's literally just this, where you can add all these free notes. So nothing fancy. I actually have Adobe as well. I downloaded Adobe Capture and a couple of other apps, but I haven't played around with them yet.
There is Notability for iPad. It's also very good.
Notability?
Yes.
Well, you can draw and write?
Yes.
Nice. OCR on the characters that you
Yes,
use? Awesome. Notability, thank you.
There is this woman that she does some zines for like small Linux commands, like TCP down, something like that, netstat, cats, something like that.
Yes, she's American?
Yes. Julia Evans?
Yeah.
Julia Evans.
Yes.
So
Julia. She's
does all the
on
zines using
Twitter.
Notability, and they're amazing, so you can do lots of things in it.
Awesome, thank you. I will definitely check that out. Yeah.
Yeah, for anyone who's actually here, if you want to convince your company to do fun things, buy a company license for comics. They're not expensive. Just have them in your, waiting area where clients come. It's much more interesting than the usual gardening magazines.
True. Nice one.
Great.
Thanks, people.
Thank you all for coming. Next month we'll have another meetup, and we'll be talking about remote work.
Yeah, so feel free to follow us on Twitter if you want to find out about the next event, or join us on Meetup.
With pairing. Remote with pairing.
With pairing, yes.
Yeah.
Can you join the meetup remote?
Yeah.
We'll think about that. We'll try.
Zoom is a nice.
This is true.
It is.
Zoom is very good for that. So.
And in fact, I don't know, Ali, what you're doing for the next meetup, but like you could also potentially join remotely. I'm signing on for this now, but as like another remote attendee.
Right.
That's
Thank you.
Yeah.